thing I would say that he said is don't do it on your own, because I think that is such an important thing, especially when we talk about strong community on our show. And something you and I talk about all the time is you can really do a lot by yourself, and you should, but it's okay to ask for help. It's not okay to be helpless.
Welcome to the On the Path podcast, a conversation on navigating life. Join Chris Coker and Colin Creech as they have honest conversations with fellow travelers on the path. In each episode, they explore the physical, mental, and spiritual health aspects of the whole self, striving for personal accountability and a strong community. Gain insights, learn from our mistakes, and hear from guests who have mastered these areas. Step on the path, embracing every challenge and success along the way. See you on the path.
And we are back. I have to say, we could have definitely talked with Dr. Steve Rose for another 2 or 3 hours. I mean, it was it was like hard to wrap it up because you wanna leave it with some kind of insider direction, but we could have gone really deep with him.
We could have. We've been talking about this a bit now, Colin, but I really, really love the academic conversations that we've been having. We've been having a lot of, PhDs and counselors and things like that, people like that on the show. And I think there's a huge amount of value in that because it gives me an opportunity to think about how I can apply those, real world, like the science and the clinical value to my own life, which is super cool.
Yeah, I think it's also a safer, individuals to interview, because bro science is great, but bro science only gets you so far in life.
That's right.
And it's good to have those experts who have not only the academic background, but also like real world experience, share what they've actually learned and seen. A little bit more data driven, maybe, if you would say. What is great about them, and every guest we have, is our icebreakers, because they're all very much humans, just like all of us. And if there was a bet on answering the question that we gave him, I would have lost it, because I was not expecting it to come out as Ron Burgundy.
Yes. Yeah, correct. Well, Ron Burgundy, but with like a
Will
Hugh
Ferrell's
Hefner-esque robe, right? And my favorite part was, I don't know, was it you or was it him? Like somebody got into like ChatGPT, or I guess
it was him. Right? He made an AI image of what he would look like as Will Ferrell, as Ron Burgundy, dressed every day. I think the question was something like, if you had to dress like somebody every day for the rest of your life, maybe an actor or a movie figure, who would it be? And it was Will Ferrell as Ron Burgundy in a kind of a smoking jacket. And the AI artwork he sent us afterwards truly made my day.
We'll show you guys. It's really good. We'll make sure we show you. I thought it was a fantastic answer. And I was a little caught off guard because I wasn't sure where it was going to go, but I was like, what a perfect answer. And then I'll say, after having a conversation with Steve, makes sense. Like I kind of understand like the angle he comes from. He's that kind of guy. He's very like debonair in his approach to life. He's pretty low key, but there's also a couple of moments where I was like, all right, you might go Will Ferrell every now and again. Like
he's truly stoic, and his answer was clearly, he was like, Will Ferrell as Ron Burgundy. And you're like, oh,
I appreciate it.
That means you've seen the movie. But no, what I think was really interesting in this discussion, kind of diving into it, was, again, we're constantly hearing this theme through these professionals like Dr. Britt, Dr. Free, and now Dr. Rose, about the power of purpose in your life and the importance you need to put on finding and really defining your purpose as not like a 2-minute exercise, something that you're reflecting on daily. And as Dr. Free said too, it's going to change throughout your life. So it's not a one-time activity.
Yeah, exactly. And the piece, to your point, the bro science, right? Like, I don't disagree when you hear like, oh, purpose is important. Of course, like intuitively, I know that that's true. But when I'm able to sit down with somebody like Dr. Rose and have a conversation around why it's important, what is the underlying significance on how it applies to my life, that's really what resonates with me. So having this talk with him around like finding purpose or the risk of not finding purpose, I think was fascinating. And so I think you might have looked it up beforehand, but like, let's just kind of ground ourselves in like, what is purpose? Like if we look at the actual like definition of purpose, what is it?
Well, according to not a definition, but maybe AI, it's in life. Purpose is a sense of meaningful direction that guides our actions, decisions, and overall outlook. It's the underlining why that motivates us, giving us a reason to pursue goals, endure hardships, and contribute to something greater than ourselves. Finding purpose, this is a key part, is deeply personal. It often aligns with our values, passions, unique talents, and bringing a sense of fulfillment and coherence to our lives.
Okay. All right. So let's tease out a couple of things here.
Please do.
So one is the underlying why. That's just, I think, a good way to kind of get rooted in it. Like your purpose is your why. The other piece that you called out, Colin, which I think is super important, is it's deeply personal. It's difficult for somebody else to tell you what it might be because no one else has the authority to tell you what your purpose might be.
Yeah.
Which is maybe, at least for me, like it's an intimidating idea. Like I said this to you before we started recording, Colin, but asking a question like, well, what is my purpose? In my mind is almost the same as like, what is the reason of life? Like why am I here? It's almost an impossible question. So, and if it's deeply personal and it's really only for me to find out, then it begs the question, how do we do it? And one of the things that I was telling you is, for me, I think it's allowing myself the grace to know that my answer could absolutely change over time. And what I do is try to think through, like, what is my purpose today? Like, and then to maybe even write it down, which is something I learned from you over the years, but like actually writing it down, like what are my intentions for today?
I might do it for different reasons, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. But I mean, what do you think? Like, as you think, because I'm sure people have asked you, I think you told me that you and Dr. Britt have had this conversation, but when you're talking about your purpose, like, how do you start to try to actually approach that with a genuine answer?
Yeah. Well, first I would say kind of what I heard from you too is like almost the most important part that we're hearing is you really got to define your purpose. You got to spend a lot of time and invest in it. But then what I just heard you say at the end there was kind of how you've been applying it is breaking it out every day. Like, what's a little thing I can do every day to make sure I'm living into that purpose and that why for me? For me specifically, as I was working a lot with Dr. Britt, and she's my therapist. Shout out to Dr. Brittany Lashua.
She is
and a guest on the
She's
podcast,
awesome.
friend of the show. It's a lot of more sometimes than just let me sit down and write this out, and we heard that from Dr. Steve Rose was you sometimes got to experiment, try new things, because it's not as simple as maybe you have already know what you need to do or you've kind of experienced it yet. I think that's the tricky part sometimes is like we have our lives, we have all these interactions, experiences in our lives, but maybe a part of this defining our purpose for ourselves is we got to try new things. We got to maybe, change or find new relationships in our life. And it's not something that happens overnight, which I think was really important. We heard from Dr. Steve Rose. The last thing I would say that he said is don't do it on your own, because I think that is such an important thing, especially when we talk about strong community on our show. And something you and I talk about all the time is you can really do a lot by yourself, and you should, but it's okay to ask for help. It's not okay to be helpless. And you really are the person for me that I'm like, all right, how does this sound? Get that spot check, because I think sometimes we get stuck with our own ideas, and having some creative input or criticism is never a bad thing from a trusted friend or 100%. Professional.
Yeah,
both
and
sides,
that's why,
and then professionals.
Correct. And if they happen to be both, and that can be good too.
It's okay.
The piece that you do a better job of this than I do, but the piece that you always call out, it's not like on this show we don't just talk about community, we talk about strong community, and that hits on exactly what you're talking about. Like, you do have to curate the people that you put in your corner, because they do have to be willing to tell you the hard truths, or they have to know you well enough to know sometimes what you need to hear. And last comment I want to make on this first piece, Colin, was when Steve mentioned this idea of like, go and experiment, like figuring out purpose is hard. Like go shop around. That is something like, it was one of those moments where I didn't know that I needed to hear it. It's not something that was on my mind, but it's like, he kind of like lifted a little bit of a weight off of my shoulders. Cause if I think about my own life, like sometimes I feel guilty, like, oh man, I'm too flighty because I take this major left-hand turn in my career, or I focus on this completely different thing in my the fitness side of my life. I've done marathons. I've done like long distance biking. I've done CrossFit. I've done fighting. I've done I've done heavy like powerlifting stuff.
No,
And I'll feel bad about like
all in 1 year.
yeah. And then on the corporate side, I've been in HR, I've been in sales, I've been in consumer packaged goods and farm. Like, and sometimes I'm like, man, like, am I clunky? Am I not doing the right thing? And I think intuitively, this is where like bro science meets actual science is. I think I had just been actually doing a pretty good job of just exploring and trying to get the richness out of life, because focusing on those experiences is actually what over the years has helped me get a little bit more clear on what my purpose is, why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. So yeah, I thought just this idea of finding purpose was probably my favorite point of the conversation with Steve.
Yeah. And I think that's, a great way to think about finding purpose too at the end is it's dynamic. It's going to evolve over time. We are also going to have new experiences. We're going to have, changes in our life that either are by choice or, part of life where we have these either difficult changes that are just thrown on us or, just part of getting older. But one thing that we really want to dive into too is what is the risk of not having purpose?
Yeah, which actually to me was so that's very unique to the episode with Dr. Steve Rose. So for everybody listening, if you've enjoyed up to now this debrief conversation, go back and listen to this episode with Dr. Steve Rose, because it was the first time we actually talked about what happens if we don't stay on the path? What happens if we don't find our purpose? And we hit on this, or he did a little bit when he talked about early on in career, this concept of transitional injury. Now, the episode was not specifically around veterans, but it was this concept he was exploring, because veterans typically are pretty in touch with purpose, right? Because they are living into a broader purpose of an organization, right? Like Colin, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran. We can both attest to, we didn't have to spend the time to think about our purpose, because in a way, the military even today is kind of this pre-modern version of purpose, which we'll talk about here in a little bit, but it was just kind of baked in. Right. And then when we get out, all of a sudden we're, salespeople, or we're HR people, we're working in, God knows what kind of company. All of a sudden it's entirely on us to decide how those things help us find our purpose. And what the point that Steve was making is, when you're not intentional about finding that, usually it means you're not looking for it. And when you're not looking for your purpose, or you're not at least in tune with the why behind the actions that you're doing, this is when you can slip into making the wrong choices, which as for those that listen to the episode, that's what took him down this path of addiction. So
his own addiction and really helping others with addiction.
Thank you. Took him down the path of being an addiction counselor. That's a critically important. So Dr. Rose, you can thank Colin for
I'm just making sure. But I think we are going to spend more time on this show talking about purpose, because when we think about the path is, you're living intentionally or, into your purpose. And we think about our whole self philosophy, which is physical, mental, spiritual, strong community, and personal accountability. Those are things that we do every day to continue to make sure we're able to stay on the path, living into our purpose. So we know we need more guests on to continue to learn more about how do you define your own purpose, because we also know it's individualized, and we don't want to tell you what yours is, because there's a lot of different types of guests listening to this show, and everybody's unique and everybody's is different. But to kind of capture the risk part, according to the online expert of ChatGPT, the risk of not having a sense of purpose can be substantial, affecting both mental and physical well-being. Without purpose, people may experience a lack of motivation, direction, and fulfillment, which can lead to feelings of apathy, emptiness, or even depression.
Yeah. And, I can't help but think at this moment in time, it's probably because after this debrief, I'm going to go and, put on my other hat and do my other job as well. But think for everybody that's listening or watching right now, think about like when you're in the workplace and some directive comes down from leadership and they don't take the time to explain why. Think of the moments that has happened in your life, and you're like, well, it just kind of sucks because you don't know why you're doing the thing you're doing. So whether that thing is easy or hard, there's no connection for that thing in your life because there's no why. And that's essentially what Dr. Rose was saying with this piece. Like, the risk of not seeking purpose in your life is equivalent to not knowing why you were doing the things you're doing in your life. And Colin, you and I, what's crazy is if I roll back to some of our earliest conversations, and the phrase that I gave you is the danger of unchecked mistakes. That's what happens. Like, when you're not seeking your why, you run the risk of hitting these unchecked mistakes. And at some point, trust me, I've been there. Colin, I know you've been there. So everybody listening, like, that happens. Like, if you're not thinking about your why, eventually you will run into a moment in your life where you go, I have made a lot of mistakes. I could have avoided them had I been a little bit more intentional and thoughtful, but I wasn't. So I hit them, and now my life is harder because of it. And now what do we do from here? And it's not to say nobody's perfect. We're going to continue to make mistakes. But the point that Dr. Rose was hitting on is just acknowledge that finding purpose, finding your why, it is important. And if you are thinking about it pretty frequently, you are going to avoid some mistakes that, would make your life more difficult than it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why we started the show in a lot of ways, because we went through that difficult time. We found unique ways to get back on the path. And now we want to continue to grow, but also it's humbling, but share it with the world. And we will continue to, I know, dive deeper into purpose. And one of the last things I think that was actually really fascinating that we talked to Steve Rose about, or Steve, was around postmodern versus modern, and really how maybe it wasn't
Pre-modern.
as much of a, let's restart. Pre-modern versus postmodern, whatever it may be. We're thinking 300, 400 years ago. Well, this is going to go great. Thinking 300 or 400 years ago versus now. There's just, we have so much more access to things. We have so many choices. We have so many luxuries. I think it does make it more challenging. And he shared that, to find your purpose versus 300 or 400 years ago. Sometimes it's not a challenge. Maybe you grow up, you're a farmer, your family's been farmers, and you are a farmer and provide food for your family and provide food for the local town. I thought that was very insightful, and maybe explains a lot why sometimes it feels in this modern world that there's a lot more people struggling than they used to.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm glad this is where we're, it's like we planned for this. This is where we're ending the debrief, because of course, like, we've talked about purpose, we've talked about the risk, but then of course there's this big gorilla in the room around, like, okay, guys, well, it's hard to find it. Yeah, absolutely. That is the truth. And yes, Colin, the pre-modern versus modern concept of purpose is like, think like pre-industrial age. Like, you didn't have the opportunity to get a job. There wasn't really a lot of major, like, urban cities yet. And so, you might've been born a farmer. If this is like medieval times, like, if you were born, a peasant working on your family farm in service of, a duke or a king or something, like, that's just what you did. And it's not that you were unhappy necessarily. That was just your station in life. Your purpose was baked into who you were inherently.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, and the world is telling us you can be anything you want to be, which I don't necessarily disagree with this concept of empowering people to pursue whatever it is that they want to pursue in their life. But I will acknowledge, when we are told you can be anything, that exacerbates how difficult it can be to answer the question, well, then who am I? And what is my purpose? And why do I do the things that I do? So, and this takes me back to what I was saying a little bit before. Like, even for me, like, it's hard for me to think about, like, what my purpose in life is. And I feel like I could give you an answer today, but one of the things I try to remember is have the grace for myself to know that answer could change tomorrow. And that's okay. It's okay if it changes, but at least I'm taking the time to think about it, daily or nearly daily.
Yeah. And I like how you're ending it with having some patience, having some grace with yourself. I think I would also say, I don't view it as a bad thing now that maybe we need to invest more time personally defining our purpose and continuing to evolve our purpose and ourselves as we continue to grow and get older.
Mm-hmm.
But I think about viewing it as also a really awesome opportunity, because we have these options, because we have so much more access in life. There's this opportunity to really define who we are and how we want to live into our purpose in this modern world.
Yeah.
So I
Right.
view it also as an opportunity, not something to get you down. Don't get overwhelmed by it. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's an
That's right.
opportunity to spend more time with yourself and get to know yourself better.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things, so I say this I tell my kids, like, choices have consequences. And if I unpack that a little bit more
Don't end
for,
this depressing. I just tried to end this positive.
oh no, we are. It's a super
Yeah,
positive. 'Cause
okay. Yeah.
For everybody out here, like, and especially for the adults that might be listening to the show, like, if I unpack that a little more, yeah, like, choices do have consequences. But really what I'm getting at is choices will influence circumstances. Like, everybody is handed different or they're dealt different cards in life, right? But ultimately, I think something we can all agree on is the choices that you choose to make in your life, they're going to influence the circumstances you're in and the experiences that you live through. Our experiences are what make up who we are. So when we're asking ourselves, like, that why question more frequently, why am I making this choice? I'm going to get up today and I'm going to work a half day because my kids have games all afternoon and it's important for me to be with them. Why am I making that choice? Well, because my kids matter. Oh, okay. Well, my kids matter to me in my life. Maybe my purpose is to be a good dad for them, right? Like, my point is, like, think through kind of those red threads. Like, how do the daily choices you are making impact the broader spectrum of who you are as a person? And for me, that's like the best thing that I can. That's why I write down, like, daily intentions. Like, what am I going to do today? And then spend a couple seconds thinking about why I'm going to do those things, because those choices are going to lead to experiences, and those experiences are going to make up who I am. And then it gives me a really strong foundation to answer that meaty question, what is my purpose? So hope that's helpful for everybody. If if it resonates, let us know or reach out. We'd love to hear how you might go about seeking purpose in your own life.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. Again, super grateful to have Dr. Steve Rose on the podcast. That
Yes.
was one of the most insightful episodes, and we kind of had to force ourselves to end it, because I would have talked to him all day. I was learning so much, and I look forward to more guests in this space as we continue to deeper dive purpose, because after talking to Dr. Brittany, Dr. Free, Dr. Rose, they're all saying the same thing. It's one of the most, if not most important things in your life, and you should be spending time thinking about it, refining it, and living into it.
Yeah, 100%. So on that note, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for yet another great debrief. And thank you, Dr. Steve Rose. Steve, you're a great guy. Really appreciate talking to you. I'm sure it will not be the last. So, and Colin, as always, you're an outstanding co-host, my man. And I am glad to be on the path right alongside you.
It's an honor and a privilege, sir. So with that, I'll see you on the path.
See you on the path.